Good morning, everybody, and welcome to those who happen to be watching on our live stream to the special meeting of our CSA Board of Directors called for Monday, October 26th at 2020, beginning at 3 p.m. Carolyn Adams, our secretary, do we have a quorum?
Yes, we do.
Great, thank you. For those who are watching on the live stream, we will be accepting questions. If you have any questions, you can write them during the meeting to info@csacpines.com. At the end of the meeting, we will take a very brief adjournment, and then we'll come back and answer any questions that you have. We would prefer that they retain questions, not comments. So if you have a 45-word sentence that's a question, we'll be happy to answer it. If it's 4.5 paragraphs of comments, we will answer those offline. I want to remind everyone that tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., we are holding the 2020 annual meeting of the membership, at which everyone is invited. All members are invited. The live stream information is available on cpinesliving.com. Tomorrow, we will also take questions and comments from the floor, and I'll be happy to read, we will happy to read any comments you have about anything. It is your meeting tomorrow. So if you have comments that don't get read today, feel free to do so tomorrow. Before we start the business of the meeting, I did want to have some preliminary comments, setting the table for what's going to happen today. In my very first letter to the community in January, I wrote that our initial focus will be on finding the funding sources needed to fulfill the desire of the overwhelming majority of our property owners to fix and improve our aging infrastructure. We haven't reached any conclusions, and over the next several months, we will consider a number of alternatives that are fair to all of our community's various stakeholders. Then in February, I wrote, in discussing our goals and objectives for the coming year, at the very top of the list is finding a satisfactory funding mechanism that will allow us to proceed in fixing, maintaining, and upgrading our crumbling critical infrastructure. We are considering, but have not yet decided upon, a number of alternatives, including new fees on services we provide, the possibility of another funding referendum to increase our annual assessments, or the adoption of a taxing district. And in March, I wrote, the board has continued to study several different funding means this month. We have not made any decisions yet, and we won't until we've done a thorough due diligence, including legal review, to be sure that what we propose can be implemented legally and effectively. We know that each funding idea has its positive aspects and support and some opposition too. And then I highlighted the following. Because I am confident that almost everyone in Sea Pines recognizes the need for funding, I am truly hopeful that our community will rally and support whatever means we adopt after this thorough analysis as being in all of our best interests. Of course, the COVID pandemic hit our nation and our island, and best made plans were put on hold. But a small group of board members who were tasked with recommending the best course of action for the community continued their work, resulting in the recommendation last month to initiate work on a special tax district for all of Sea Pines, designed to raise the funds we determined would be necessary to repair, replace, and enhance our critically aging infrastructure. Before going into our activities over the last month since that announcement, I want to remind everyone of our obligations as board members under the South Carolina Nonprofit Act. The act is quite clear for those of us who are zoomed in today. A director shall discharge his duties as a director, including his duties as a member of a committee, in good faith, with the care an ordinarily prudent person in a like position would exercise under similar circumstances, and in a manner that the director reasonably believes to be in the best interest of the corporation. I want to be very clear. It is this board's strong and unanimous view that the most important decision we must make in the best interest of the community as a whole is to find the long-term funding needed to bring our aging infrastructure back to first-class status. We understand that various alternatives impact various elements of our community differently. Under every alternative we studied, some group of property owners could reasonably claim that they would be paying more than their fair share. But as a board, we must be focused on the we and not on the me, on what is best for the community as a whole and not necessarily what may be better for any particular group of property owners. If a neighborhood floods because our drainage system fails in a heavy rain, It doesn't matter whether the homes there are owned by residents or non-residents and are occupied by renters or owners. If a street fails and requires a major repairs, it doesn't matter whether it is in an enclosed neighborhood or on a main thoroughfare that leads to commercial areas. If our leisure trails are cracked and raised or narrowed by growth, it won't matter whether they're being used by walkers or bikers, residents or renters. Our community infrastructure must be rebuilt, repaired, and supplemented, and every single property owner, resident and non-resident, renting or not, will benefit by assuring that our lifestyle and our property values are retained and enhanced by these expenditures. At our last meeting, we discussed at length the alternative of pursuing a simple referendum the resort would approve rather than the special tax district. Because given the impacts of the pandemic, the resort did not think the timing was right for an increase in their assessment. We concluded that a referendum that only increased the assessments on residential property owners and commercial owners did not have a reasonable chance of achieving the very high 75% plus one vote necessary for passage. We had to make a reasoned analysis of what was best for the community as a whole and felt that the only available alternative that would achieve a long-term financial footing for the community as a whole was to pursue a special tax district. We understood the shortcomings of this approach. Not everyone was going to pay the same amount and not everyone was going to get to vote on it. But we believed and still believe that fixing the infrastructure is the end that justifies the means in all these cases. Since that meeting, we have received hundreds of emails and comments on Facebook asking us to give a simple referendum another try as a superior alternative to the proposed special tax district. In almost every case, the commenter professes to accept the need for long-term funding for our community. And that's very important to this board. Virtually every commenter accepts the need for long-term funding for the community. So today, our board will consider a resolution to initiate a very simple referendum. Additional dollars, $600 per year, which is less than $1.50 a day and $50 a month, starting in 2022, for use solely to repair, replace, and enhance our roads, bridges, leisure trails, and drainage systems. There are no other bells or whistles attached to this proposal right now. Changes in the covenants are not included, and there are no extraordinary spending involved. And none of these funds will be used for the development of the gallery shops. If we adopt this referendum today, I'm expecting that the resort and commercial property owners may also participate in an increased assessment in amounts we will determine over the next several weeks. I have spoken to every board member on this issue, and I can say without hesitation that we have great hope that the community will rally around the proposed referendum and vote its passage. That said, unfortunately, none of us will be surprised if Facebook erupts with posts that complain that we didn't do this or that with the proposal, as lots of people will have lots of individual ideas on what they believe is the perfect solution. But this referendum will only pass if individuals can put aside their individual views and agree to vote in the best interest of the community. Again, I'm asking people to consider this referendum, if it is adopted today, and vote for the we rather than the me. There is simply no other way to get over the 75% plus one threshold. I want to also make clear that at the same time, given this board's commitment to finding the resources needed to fix our critical infrastructure, our staff and board members will continue to work with the county and our legal counsel to develop the tools needed to pursue a special tax district. In the hopefully unlikely case that this simple referendum fails, we will be ready to move forward and initiate the petition process for the special tax district. We have no choice but to act in the best interest of the community as a whole. And absent any other reasonable alternative, and despite the many protests of the special tax district, none have been proposed other than a simple referendum. We will move forward. Thank you for putting up with my comments. I hope that they hit home in the way that people will understand what this board's mission is. And with that, Mr. Ellis, I believe you have a motion to make regarding a proposed referendum. Unmute. There you are. You're off. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I want to move the adoption of the following resolution. Resolved that the Board of Directors hereby directs CSA staff to begin the process for holding a referendum vote to be conducted as soon as reasonably possible after December 15, 2020, in accordance with the 1974 Declaration of Covenants and Restrictions by Sea Pines Plantation Company, Inc., being referred to as the 1974 Covenants, as amended, which referendum votes shall contain the following terms. First, the annual residential assessment described in paragraph A of Article 3 of the 1974 Covenants shall be increased by $600 after adjustment for the year 2021 in accordance with paragraph A2 of Article 3 of the 1974 Covenants, and the 2021 annual residential assessment as so increased and adjusted shall be the base annual residential assessment for 2022 and all annual residential assessments thereafter. Item 2, funds collected from the increase approved by this referendum as the increase from time to time in accordance with paragraph A2 of Article 3 of the 1974 Covenants shall be restricted to a critical capital needs fund to be used only for the repair, replacement, addition, and improvements of the roads, bridges, bulkheads, leisure trails, stormwater facilities, and drainage systems located in or servicing the Sea Pines Plan community. And expenditures from the Critical Capital Needs Fund shall be reported on in CSA's annual audited financial statements, and changes in the assessment for the resort and commercial property owners to be determined prior to the referendum vote being finalized. With that motion, if somebody would second it, then we can begin discussion, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Caskey, seconding. I have a second from Jim Caskey. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Steve, did you want to make some comments?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Larry, I wanted to mainly respond to a letter that you issued a few weeks ago that had some language and discussion regarding the resort. And as you and I have talked, we didn't agree with the letter. We thought it was very unfortunate that you issued the letter, and it didn't clearly and correctly state our position. And I want everybody to know that we have always supported the community. We've always supported CSA. We strongly supported the previous referendum that was held last year. And our hesitation this time was not because we didn't want to support the community or we didn't want to support the community financially. We felt like we're in the middle of a crisis in the country, as you know, and it's impacted our community as well. And here we are in the middle of this coronavirus and the pandemic that has come along with it, and economic concerns. And we just haven't felt like, our board and ownership has not felt like this was the right time to increase anyone's assessment, not the resort's assessment and certainly not the residential assessment. But if the community is supportive of the referendum and this board feels this is the right time to move forward, we will certainly support it as well, both with our approval and financially as well. So I just want to clarify, we didn't think the letter was clearly written, and we want to make sure that people understood that we always and have always supported the community and supported CSA.
Thank you, Steve. Again, I apologize if there was any misunderstanding on my part in the way it was framed. I don't think there's any doubt on anyone on this board that Resort is certainly a great supporter of the community and has a huge investment that has increased all of our property values and the value of Sea Pines as a whole. Mark King, unmute, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, last Monday, we had a very extensive workshop where we discussed the decision to go forward with the referendum if in fact the board felt like it was feasible. And I think at this point we clearly feel that way. We talked about several alternatives to the $600 as well as the index as to whether the CPI was the correct index or not. And what I would like to, after I've thought about it, and I've had this discussion with several other board members, I would like to propose a change to item 1 of the resolution and so hopefully we can have a good discussion. The first change that I would like to see happen is that instead of the initial year being $600, that be reduced to $450. And my thought is that in the prior referendum, which unfortunately failed in early summer of 2019, it basically called for a stepped up referendum of $150 the first year, $300 the second, and $450 the third year. What we are talking about now is a referendum that we will hopefully pass, but will not collect until January of 2022, approximately 2.5 going on 3 years later than the prior referendum year 3. So I think starting at the $450, it makes sense to tie into the prior referendum. And we know based on the hydrology studies and the updated engineering studies that our costs have gone up over and above what was assumed for the 2019 referendum. The second change I would like to discuss, and quite frankly, I think this is the more significant change, is that the consumer price index has practically never reflected the actual increase in our operating expenses of the community, and certainly not the capital expenses of the community. And Dave Ellis made a very good suggestion at the workshop where we should consider replacing the consumer price index with the construction price index, which comes much more accurately in depicting where we're going to be spending the larger portion of this increase for infrastructure. And so the consumer price index, I think if Charles Frazier were alive, in retrospect, he would agree that that was a very poor index to reflect the inflationary pressures on the community on an annual basis. And quite frankly, if we had had the construction price index 30 or 40 years ago, I don't even think we'd be having the conversation today. So what I would propose, and I think there's several other board members that share this thought, and I certainly welcome them to weigh in, is that if we start at the $450, I think it will be a little easier on some of our constituents. A lot of us feel like $600 is not a big deal, but we do have some folks in the community on a fixed income that extra $150 is a big deal. And so I think we start at the $450. We change the index to a much more accurate index that will be something that will keep us going forward for the long term with inflationary numbers that depict the actual increases of how we're going to spend the money, so that we don't have to have this same conversation in 8 or 9 or 10 years. So those are the two changes that I would like to put to provision 1 of the proposed resolution.
Is there a second for that amendment? Just raise your hand.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I second. I agree 100%. I sat with Charles Frazier for 5 years, and he disagreed with the CPI index at that time. I can speak for him. It was not the correct index, but that's what they chose to use. The construction CPI index is much better, and the 450 is better.
Before we get into discussions of either of those items or the resolution, I'd like Sam Bennett and Dave Borghese to go through the analysis that they put together for the board and for those who may be watching and ultimately the full community to establish what our needs are. Because I think as we're deciding how much money we're going to be asking the folks to put up, it would be nice if we knew what our needs were and how the amounts would in fact meet those. So Sam and Dave, how do you want to proceed?
Sandra, would you please put it up?
Thank you all.
I hate to ask, can I drive for just a minute, might be a little easier?
Yeah.
Can the board hear me okay?
You need the pad, yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's better.
Thank you. Can the board hear us okay?
Yeah, can you
Yes.
make it, please?
Very good. All right, so let me start with this spreadsheet. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. Hope y'all can see that. And I want to focus on a little bit of history in the reserve study and the way that CPIN's CSA has been funding both infrastructure projects and capital expenditures over the course of the past 10 years or so. And I will ask, as always, Dave Brigade, the smartest guy in the room when it comes to these things, to correct me as he needs to. What we tried to do with this, well, first of all, what we did was these dollars you get in front of you, they are specifically focused on critical infrastructure as defined by the resolution: roads, bridges, stormwater, ditches, drainage, those things. This does not include any tree work. It doesn't include anything related to enhanced landscaping. It does not include anything related to the gallery shops. The numbers we're going to talk about are specifically for infrastructure projects. And so if you look at the first half of the spreadsheet, where the historical revenues available for projects over the past 10 years has been $25.5 million. Well, that covers two pieces. It covers the infrastructure projects, which are really the first three line items, and then it also covers facilities and capital expenditures. When we talk about facilities, we're talking about the CSA building, Tower Beach, the maintenance facilities, those existing buildings that we have. And then when you talk about capital expenditures, it's really vehicles and equipment. So we will pull those two things out of the conversation because those aren't part of the conversation for infrastructure moving ahead. We know we're going to have to take care of those facilities. We're going to have to replace the equipment and the vehicles. So the $1.7 million and the $6.8 million comes out of the conversation. But when you back those things out of the conversation, available over the next 10 years is $16.2 million to do projects. Again, projects being infrastructure projects, road resurfacing, leisure trails, bridge resurfacing, and beach access trails. So $16.2 million will be available over the next 10 years to do those things. But it's very important for me to note under the road resurfacing that when we talk about road resurfacing, we are just talking about milling the road and putting a new coat of asphalt over top of it. There, in the reserve study does not account for the condition of the roads under the asphalt. It doesn't take that into account when they come in and they update that study each year. They don't know what's under the surface. They just look at the road and determine the useful life of the road pavement and determine when it needs to be replaced. And so that's really critical when we talk about this, because I think as the community knows, and certainly the board knows, what we're really finding out is what matters to us most is not what we can see. That does matter to us on the roads, but the biggest financial challenge we're having is what we can't see. And that's the drainage infrastructure piece, the stormwater piece. So remember $16.2 million over the next 10 years. And then we'll scroll down to our focus, what we think we need in addition to this.
Sam,
Yes.
just quick to clarify.
Yes.
So when you say that 16, that is what's built into our normal financial forecasts.
Yes, Jim, I guess Jim Caskey, that is correct. And the road resurfacing piece, that's what the reserve study says, that $13 million. The roads that are recognized in the reserve study to be fixed. All right, so that's where we're getting the roads from that $13 million represents as well.
And this reflects historical practice as well, correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
So we spent about $1.6 million a year on capital like that. Okay, thank you.
All right. So when I moved to the expenditure piece, what we did is we took a look. Could I go a little bit further? We took a look at what we need to spend moving ahead to do the things that need to be done.
Okay.
Sorry, the dog got me distracted chasing a squirrel. So the expenditure, if you look at the expenditure piece, what we've done is we have taken the lengths of roads and we have applied the most current data that we have, data points that we have on the cost to repair and rebuild those roads where it's necessary. And so the numbers you have in front of you there represent the costs that we feel in today's dollars that will cost to do the projects you see, Sea Pines Drive, the Ocean reconstruction, Ocean Gate to Lighthouse Road. Well, that $2.5 million, that's just a component of it. It's really actually more than that. Part of that, the remainder of that is in the $13 million because that road was scheduled to be done. But that road is going to, as y'all know, is much more expensive than what the reserve study had said. So what we've done is we've gone through each road that needs to be done, and we have gotten down and figured as best we can with the information we have and the breakdown from the North Sea Pines Drive improvements and rebuild, what we think the costs are going to be moving ahead to do the roads you see in front of you. In particular, the two pieces aren't roads. You will see the Deer Island Bridge reconstruction. That bridge is going to have to be rebuilt. The CSA did a great job a few years ago getting a little more useful life out of that, but the engineering folks have made it clear to us that within the next 10 years, we're going to have to rebuild that bridge, and that is the cost number to do that. We own that bridge. Nobody's going to take care of that for us. We have to do it ourselves. The $2 million is the estimate for the Lighthouse Road addition from Harbor Town to Fraser Circle to add the necessary components needed to add the additional leisure trail there that we need during the busy season, which seems to be getting longer and longer now. And then the rest of those dollars there represent the work that needs to be done under the surface when we go in and we rebuild and rework those roads in a way that need to be done under the primary road reconstruction. So when you total all that up, it leaves you with a $35 million total for $14 million available for drainage. All right, so you sum that last column, all the roads that need to be done under the expenditures, and the $14 million for drainage, and that brings us to the $35 million total. We had a $35 million total, the $16 million total. It brings us to $51 million roughly over the next 10 years. To note, under the $14 million, you'll see under there what that $14 million for drainage will go for will be bank stabilization, lagoon dredging, pipe and inlet replacement, drainage and ditch restoration, and drainage improvements on the roads being milled and repaved under the reserve study. So these two numbers work together. If we don't have the $35 million, we've still got the 13 coming to us for the milling and paving, but you will be milling and paving a road that is collapsing and failing under the surface. So again, the focus with this was to really try and give us as accurate numbers as we possibly could in today's dollars with the level of rebuild and repair for the roads and the drainage system that we could do over the next 10 years.
And Sam, to confirm what you told me, these are real dollars. These are dollars that are based on bids and updated hydrology studies from experts. And so when you go back to what we looked at in 2018, putting together the 2019 referendum, we were anticipating dollars, we were forecasting, but you have real numbers for these major projects, which makes them more accurate perhaps even than we had last time. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, having not been through the last time, I'll let Mr. Borghese after that, but I will say this, Larry, based on the hydrology study that the CSA board did in 2016 and the reserve study that's updated regularly, using those two documents that have been the foundations for CSA making spending decisions previously, using these current inputs, yes, I mean, this is as accurate as we can make it with what we've got to work with right now. David?
Yeah, the only thing I'm really going to add to that is when you think about the reserve study that was used for the last referendum, that was done in 2016. And a lot of the actual road construction, the actual costs that we now know of, were not embedded in those reserve study numbers. So we believe we have much more accurate, although they are only current cost of construction. And we know these projects are not all going to be done in 1 year. They're going to be done sequentially over the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And there's nothing in these numbers, particularly with respect to Sea Pines Drive and the primary road construction, that allows for additional cost escalation relative to construction costs. So these are our best numbers. You can guess at whatever increases in costs going forward. You'd have to figure out when you'd have to do the work. We have a limited season in which we actually can complete construction. It's only 6 or 7 months every year. But to give you an idea, we have used some very recent bids, but as far as such as Lighthouse Road and Greenwood Drive, we took the actual costs for the portions that have been done over the last couple of years, and we're using those unit costs to project the remainder of the road reconstruction that has yet to be completed. So I think these numbers are far better than whatever was being used in the 2018 referendum.
And Mark, to your point, again, I want everyone to have an opportunity to say, but the reason that the resolution, which I drafted and with Sam's help and the staff's help put together at 600, is because this is a number that we need, roughly 3.5 million per year. You need $600 per property owner at 5,800 property owners to get to 3.5 million. If you go at 450, you're 900,000 short every single year. And then we're back at where the problems that we keep facing. So I think I understand your concern that there may be some property owners for whom the extra 150 is a problem. I have total sympathy for that. But the problem with the last referendum was we tried to figure out what people wanted to pay without regard to what we needed, and we still lost. We've got a community that understands the need to fund the research, to fund these expenses. They are willing to pay. And to tell them that we aren't going to ask for the right amount of money, and we're still going to be short, even with the CPI, it takes a while to catch up, and we can talk about whether we want to change the CPI as well. But let's keep in mind, if we have the need and we can document the need, we ought to be asking for what we need, not for what some people may or may not be able to pay. I just hope people will keep in mind, this goes back to asking the community to vote for the what's best for the community, not necessarily individually, can I afford it this week or next? It's $1.50 a day, $50 a month, and I understand there will be some for whom this is not as easy as others. But I do suggest if we keep trying to find the lowest element, we're going to end up 900,000 or $1 million short every year. Can we go back to full screen?
I was going to ask him. I'm going to go back to the full screen and take any questions anybody has.
Stop screen.
Which one?
The message, stop
there,
screen or stop share. Yes, there you go.
Okay.
Now we'll take questions. Bill Johnson.
Thank you for the presentation. I've got a couple questions. In your expense line item, you talked about primary roads. We've got miles of secondary roads that are failing just as badly. Is there any allowance for the rebuilding of those secondary roads? And why I'm asking, I'm going to ask my second question, you can combine. We talked about the possibility of looking at construction CPI instead of overall CPI. Do you have a 3 or 5 year trailing construction CPI numbers that we could use to compare to overall CPI?
Bill, let me answer your first question. So in the $13 million you see for road resurfacing, about $3 million of that is for the primary roads. The remainder, the other $10 million, is for the secondary and tertiary roads that are scheduled in the next 10 years. So in that $13 million, there is a component in there for the rest of the roads. No, I shouldn't say the rest. The roads that are scheduled under the reserve study in the next 10 years to be milled and paved. So there is consideration for that there, but understand that's what there is not in that $10 million the drainage piece to fix those roads. So for an example, if you live on Otter Road, that road may be set to be milled and paved, but there are drainage issues on that road that are significant, or any of the T streets on the ocean side of Sea Pines Drive. there may be dollars in that $10 million to mill and pave those roads, but there is no.
That's where we got the other 14 million.
There's no drainage money in there. And so, so yes, there is money there, but there's no drainage money in there. That's part of the $14 million that's listed under the 35. And under the construction CPI, I don't have those numbers in front of me. We can put them together in a way to get back to y'all. I haven't had a chance to do that.
Mark King. Unmute, Mark. If folks don't have dogs or kids in the room, they can probably stay unmuted. No, you're still on mute, Mark. Can we unmute him? No,
Mark's having a technical issue. Maybe you want to
Larry,
Not the video.
yeah, I'd like to make a point, a couple points. I think it's unfair to characterize alternatives. What Mark was talking about is not enough money, because we've run some numbers on that. And over the course of 10 years, if you go the $450 route with a construction index, at the end of the 10 years, you end up with $33 million instead of $27 million. So that's just not a correct statement to say that these other options don't meet the challenge. One of my biggest concerns over the last couple of years is not anticipating significant cost overruns in these projects. I think, as we all know, the construction business is famous for, I'll just say it in a positive way, of inflation and things drastically improving the numbers. I spoke to Sam a couple of months ago and I said, there's no way in the world that $25 million is going to get this done. And I think we all know that it's going to be 30, 35, $40 million. So I think it's very important that we consider putting in an index, if we're going to do this over 10 years, with something that has been proven in the past to work to keep up with the construction inflation. And I think, I like Mark's idea. I much prefer it. I don't care whether, I won't say I don't care. I don't think to characterize it as we're going for a low number because some people don't want to pay it. That certainly is a reality. There's people that, had rather pay a lower number. But to me, I'm focused on the long term, 10, 12, 15 years from now, that construction index is going to serve us well. And if we're not doing all of this construction at one time, which we are not, we're not going to be $900,000 short every year. That's just not an accurate, in my opinion, picture of what's going on. So going forward, I'd like us to have this discussion and we can go back and forth between them. But clearly, and I think, Mark, didn't you or perhaps Stu send everybody a copy of some of those numbers that we ran out going long term?
Yeah, Scott, I think that Dave Ellis, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you had actually looked up the 4-year average of the construction price index, and it was somewhere around 4.5%. And probably for that same period, the CPI was somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5, maybe 1.25. So Larry, I think what you're missing in your calculation is the erosion each and every year of the $600, because it's not reflecting the actual increase in the following year. So as you take that out and erode the $600, the 450 actually comes pretty close to being a zero-sum game. And I think to Scott's point, it solves the long term as to where it accurately reflects what our increased costs are for both capital and operating needs, because we know, for just one example, how tough it's been to replace the labor in the security department because of the salary and wages going up, primarily because of the off-island demand. And we're at the very end of the food chain here on the south end of the island. So I think Scott is absolutely right. What's more important to adjust is to come up with an indices that makes more sense for the future. So. enough said.
Mark, just for clarity, the $600 would be added to the base in 2022 and would in fact index with whatever CPI we went. So it isn't a flat 600, it's a 600 becomes whatever the number is in 2022, and that becomes the base, which indexes up. So we're only talking about a 2% if the index is 3. I don't know where the 450 gets you. Obviously, when it breaks out, but
the 450 gets you to 333 million instead of 27 over the same period. When you talk about having needing the extra money for some of the same.
Scott, you don't know where the 600 indexed at whatever the CPI would be as well. So we don't have that research, which is another reason I'm concerned about changing it here. But Carolyn?
So if the initial remarks that were made, there was an indication made that both the commercial and the resort would contribute something to the referendum. So how can we determine a dollar amount as to what we are asking the property owners to do without understanding the magnitude dollar-wise of what the resort and the commercial might do? Or maybe you guys have that information.
I think the answer to that is based on even last year's referendum. The magnitude of what the property owners pay total, it dwarfs what the result from either the resort or the commercial were going to pay. And so the dollar is a couple dollars. It would be at most a couple dollars. It would not, unless either was going to significantly increase what they have proposed, and I don't even know if they're going to do the same. It would not move the needle on what the property owners needed.
But a couple of dollars, is that $2? I mean, we're talking about the difference right now between $450 and $600, which is $150, which is a lot. But a couple of dollars, I mean, you're talking $25, $50. I mean,
no, probably not even nearly that much. No, small, literally small dollar. It would not change what we would probably need.
Thank you.
Larry, I'd like to ask a question.
Go ahead, JR.
In item 2, we're restricting the use funds of the additional $600. I'm assuming that we're only restricting the use of that portion of the assessment, not the portion of the assessment we already have.
That's correct. This would be separate in a separate account, CPI'd up separately. Obviously would show the total, but it would be up to Victoria to keep and Dave and the future Victoria and the future Dave to keep these books separately, so that if you question how the money had been spent, we could show where it went. Barry?
Yeah, I'd like to just shift this a little bit. I understand the complexities of the funding. Obviously, it's an awful lot of money. And I am supportive of really looking at the construction index, because I think that's something we need to consider. But I think I'm most concerned about, and what I've heard most from people in the community, and I think I'm happy to hear that, is that we have put the STD in a secondary mode. It's there if we have to do it, if the referendum fails. But what I've heard most from people is just tell us how much it is, how you're going to use the money, and give us a dollar amount, get it done. And I think the issue with us right now is that it needs to be simple and understandable. And I think Sam did a very good job, along with Victoria and David, in giving us the line items of where the monies are being spent. I think it explains it very well. I'm sure there'll be some nuance-oriented questions that'll come up. But I like the idea of having a figure that people understand. It's $50 a month in a community where we have been underfunded for years. We know what our position has been on the island. I think we're second from the bottom. We're maybe at the bottom in terms of what our are. And we're the oldest community with the most amount of work that needs to be done. So I really support the fact that we've moved the STD into a secondary mode and are willing to go forward with the referendum, and need the community's support for the challenge of getting a 75% yes vote. So that's where I am, and I applaud us as you can see, I hope people understand there's a diversity of opinions going on this board, And, but I think we've all kind of arrived at this. We've got to figure out what the details are going to be, but we need the support of the community, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. And only since you raised it, I did ask Sam to check. And if we went to $600, which would be something less than in 2022, anticipating a CPI as we expect it to be, we would be greater only than Shipyard at something less than 1,000, and Hilton Head Plantation at something around 1,300. Every other community on the island pays more. As you say, Barry, we are the oldest with the most work to be done. So I don't think people who would have, I don't mean this to be funny, but the truth is there aren't a lot of places where you could move on this island and pay lesser assessment. But not to mention other fees that you might be paying. David, hand up.
Larry?
Hold on, Jim. David Pardue's had his hand up.
Okay.
David, unmute.
Unmute, David.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. I appreciate what Barry just said. I think that that kind of brings it home. The important thing to me is that, as Barry said, is that people are now seem to be behind us. Just tell us the dollars and do what it takes. Now, from the presentation that we've heard and with Sam and Dave's input, it seems to me that we've got roughly a $35 million hole, but that's in today's dollars. And so if that means that we need $600 a year, we not only need $600 a year per person, but we need an inflation index that's going to keep up with what the true inflation is going to be. And so I would go kind of the opposite of what Mark was talking about. I think we need the full $600. And if we want to do the, if we want to truly keep up inflation and do what construction inflation and do what this needs, we need the $600 plus changing the CPI to a construction index. Now, on the goal of just keeping it simple and not have people arguing, the community arguing about the index, maybe we, just keep the regular CPI and, keep it simple. But if the goal is to raise what we need and have it indexed to whatever our costs are going to be, guesstimates over the next 10 years, then it's got to be, then the index has got to be something closer to the construction index, it seems to me.
Jim Cassidy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to, we bought in 2012, and I don't think there's been a substantial assessment increase in the, what is that number, or 2008 we bought, in the 12 years we've had our property. So I think this is what the numbers Sam showed is an illustration of how deep this hole is. So I think if the community, and I am very pleased that we made a judgment on the district, the community is now challenging that judgment and say, rethink that to a referendum. So I think coming to the facts that we've come to and having adequate resources to fix this is the headline. And if we can index it and we think that would pass the referendum, I think that's great. But I think to short ourselves on the base number, given the depth of this hole and the amount we've kicked this can down the road, talked about infrastructure, needed infrastructure. We all know what happens when it rains. It's pretty disastrous. So I think we're at a point where we really need to deliberate. Do we freeze on the 600 and have an index, or just stay simple at 600? I think that's kind of the question I'm hearing. But I applaud the community for their response to give us the feedback that we were looking for as we start on a journey. And I think hopefully the community sees a board willing to step back and reconsider the original judgment that was made.
Stu?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Weigh in on a couple things, if I might. As everybody said, we're on the right track, and I think we're down to, two options: the 600 at the CPI, or maybe the 450 at the construction index. Either one will get us there. I think we're more into the mode of figuring out which one has the highest probability of passing. I personally like the construction index for two reasons. One is what Mark proposed actually generates at the construction index at the 450 actually generates about 20% more money over the 10 years than the 600 at the CPI, just because of the compounding effect. And to put it in perspective, Mark had asked me to run it, so I ran it. If we had actually put the construction index in, and by the way, I was using the non-residential construction index, which has averaged 4.5% for the last 4 years. If we had put that in effect 20 years ago, we would have collected an extra $40 million over what we did on the CPI, and we wouldn't be having this discussion. So I'm in favor of whichever one we end up with, although I do lean toward the 450 and the construction index. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Stu, if I may, I very much appreciate those comments, and they're obviously well researched. You made two excellent points. One is we need to find the referendum that will pass, most likely pass, because the community will not be happy if it doesn't pass, because we will go to an STD, that's special tax district. We have to do that. And the monies at that point may be exactly the same. The other thing I think you've said, which makes me nervous, is your calculation that under a construction index, we might actually be raising more money. I think that's an excellent idea, but it may be the very thing that raises the hackles of the people who are saying, tell me what you need now, I'll pay it and not worry. I think other future boards, if we don't have enough money, will have that authority. My whole goal today is for us to try to find a way that responds to the community's desire to have a simple referendum that many people are optimistic will pass. And I do fear, and Mark, I absolutely agree with everything you've said. I think it needs more research to actually do all the numbers, but I accept what you said, that our CPI is not the right one. But I want folks to keep in mind, the goal is to give the community a simple referendum that they will get behind in large numbers. And my only fear with the CPI is it will take some time to do all that research and then calm any fears that it's going to blow out of proportion. So keep those thoughts in mind. I saw a hand up from Scott.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if there's anything this community's gotten wrong for the last 60 years, it's been CPI and doing exactly what you said, which is pick a number. What do we need now? We got to get right. I mean, that is, long experiences in dealing with budgets and things. You've got to put something in there that is going to be accurate to meet future needs. The inflation is going to be there. I mean, it is just, we can't ignore that. We've got all the evidence we need to show that the CPI was not correct thing to do for our community as much as people wanted it to be. I think we would be neglecting our duty to not come in here with, you can call it the construction index or pick another number, but the current CPI, which has been running between 1.25% and 1.75%, is never going to do it. It's not going to do it. Anybody that's in the construction business will tell you that's not going to do it. Now, whether we start at 600 or 450 or 500 or what have you, I mean, I don't care. I mean, I think the indexing number is more important than the other number. And you started off saying, talking about trying to pick the number that I think you chastised somebody for picking the 450 number because you said that was below what we needed at the time. But we've got to figure out a way to come up with a number that we can all agree on. But as I said, I think is much importance about getting this index thing correct. And I don't think it's going to take any large amount of time to figure it out. We're talking about not implementing this until 2022 is my understanding. I mean, I'm guessing it'd take somebody that knows how to get the information a matter of a couple of days to figure out what the last 10 years community. I mean, you might be able to go on your iPhone right now and get the number. So I don't think that's a valid reason to not investigate this. I mean, if we have to wait another week, have another special meeting or another 2 weeks, to me, why would we not do that to get this correct and have no future board of CSA ever have to deal with this again? And I really feel very strongly about that, obviously, and I'll hush.
Thank you, Scott. I chastise my grandchildren. I hope I'm not chastising anyone on the board, but rather suggesting different points of view. But it's certainly possible. Sam's been chastised a couple of times by me, so he can tell me whether I did it this time. Bill Johnson. Bill?
You know, we're sitting here trying to look into our crystal balls and gaze forecast 10 years out. And I don't think anybody right now can say with any certainty that we're going to call this right. We have a number that we need to meet within a 10-year period of $35 million. And I think we keep the thing simple. And I think that we sunset this in 10 years and let future boards look at where we are, reanalyze it, and take it forward to the next generation.
I'm going to call the question that we have an amendment on the floor to amend the resolution, which is $600 a year, starting in 2022, to change it to $450 with a construction index, replacing the CPI index. All in favor of the amendment, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. All opposed to the amendment, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Thank you. The amendment fails. Are there any other proposed changes to the resolution? And thank you, Mark, and thank everyone for that very good discussion. Bill?
Again, I would like to propose an amendment to sunset this in 10 years.
Okay, is there a second? Seeing none, Bill, I appreciate your thoughts, but I think from what I've heard from many board members, the needs are not going to go away. When you rebuild North Sea Pines Drive, in 15 years, you're going to need to do more. The drainage will continue. And the truth is that even with the number, any future board can decide to charge less than the amount of the prior year if in fact it's not needed. And I presume if the community at the time feels that boards are spending money where it's no longer needed, they will elect a new group of people to change the board. So I think that's the notion that I've heard from many people as to why a sunset isn't needed. I know there's a thought that a sunset helps, but truthfully, and I say this as much to the people listening as to this board because we've all gone through it. Many of us have gone through it now for 3 years running. The thought of having to come up with new funding mechanisms divides the community so badly and creates so much anxiety that I'd rather leave to future boards to decide not to spend the money than to have them to go through again. So I think that's a good sentiment. Are there any other ideas or changes we should be talking about to this resolution?
Yes, Larry, I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, Steve.
I'm just wondering, we've had this discussion about different levels of assessment and the CPI discussion, and wondering, why is it important that we take the vote of the resolution today? And couldn't we spend a week or two, and I think we've got a November meeting scheduled anyway, and determine the resorts assessment during that time, the commercial assessment during that time, and continue to do some calculations on these different ideas that we've had today?
Well, as a personal matter, I would like to be able to, and perhaps we can do it without actually coming to a final conclusion. I think the community that has been roiled up, although the number of people who are commenting is by comparison to our total population, a still relatively small percentage. It is certainly a group of people who are concerned and angry and have raised what they believe to be a better alternative, which is to have a referendum. I do believe, Steve, that if we pass this resolution today, when we come back to the November board meeting, we can amend it to include if the resort, whatever the resort and the commercial have added. And if we choose to, because we're not planning to put out a vote until December, we can change the CPI at that point. I'm hopeful candidly, that we will be hearing from many of the same community members who have opposed the STD and telling us whether they believe we've done the right thing, the wrong thing, or not. And we can certainly assess, as we are doing today, the comments we get from the community.
Well, it seems like a good reason to delay a few weeks or a couple of weeks to give the community a chance to weigh in, and at the same time do these calculations and determine the final amounts that would be included in the referendum.
Mr. Borghese?
Worthy suggestion, but quite frankly, I believe this community needs to know that this board is going to move to an alternate, to a alternate rather than a special tax district. And I think by passing this motion today gives some certainty and some clarity of where this board is going. I think we can add whatever we need to add in November or amend whatever we need to amend in November, but I think we need to pass this resolution right now, today.
Mr. Cassidy?
Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment. I think if we come out of this room not acknowledging the feedback that we got, the judgment that we modified, and a resolve that we're going to go after a referendum, a simple one, and we're going to, and at this point in time, we believe that's $600 a month, and work through the fine details, give ourselves a time limit of, for example, back into the calendar, no more than 10 days, so that we can have this referendum out and passed, ideally, if it's allowed in our bylaws, by the end of the year even. So, but I do believe we can't leave this room without a commitment that we're pursuing a simple referendum.
Scott?
So who's going to be tasked with studying these numbers? I hear all this conversation, and okay, I will freely admit I'm jaded. I was in the political process for 20 years, and one thing you don't do is ever pass something and say, oh, by the way, we're going to fix it later and get it right, and then everybody will be happy. That happens about 1 out of every 2,000 times you do it. Sorry to be a little bit flippant, but I just don't get it. I mean, I don't know why we wouldn't spend another 2 weeks and just get this thing exactly the way they want it. And it might be just like it is right now. But when we have the ability to get those numbers and fix it, I don't think there's anybody in the Sea Pines community right now that thinks we have any idea of going to the special tax district without running another referendum. I don't think that feeling is out there. And all you've got to say, Mr. Chairman, is we're not doing that till we get through figuring out exactly what we want on this referendum, and we're going to do it within 2 weeks or what have you, and do that. It's not a good thing, I don't think, to put something out there as gospel when it might not be gospel. You know, what if we change it to whatever, $500 and a guaranteed 3% or something? Who knows? Somebody may come up with something better. Then you got to go through that whole process again.
Scott, let me make it, maybe I wasn't clear. Jim, if this resolution passes today, other than determining what, if anything, the resort and the commercial will be included, I don't think we have another set of discussions or meetings. This is the resolution. Now, obviously, at our next board meeting, any board member can ask for a different proposal, but I think we should be telling, as Dave Borghese said, if this passes, we're telling the community what the referendum will be other than the commercial and the resort. And I think we've decided not to change the CPI at this time. And we've decided not to do a sunset at this time. I don't think we mean to suggest, I certainly, as your chairman, don't mean to suggest that this is going to be a running debate and discussion. That's why we're having this meeting today. So we can tell the community we are having a referendum. And the only reason it isn't starting until sometime in early December is because we have another election going on, which I don't think it's fair to get to overlap with. And it does take some time to get all the paperwork done and work with the resort and the commercial. Mr. Spear, you have been surprisingly silent. It's happy to see you talking.
That's not what my wife's, whoops. That's not what
on.
Says. I've listened to the last hour worth of conversation. I'm in complete agreement with Mr. Borghese that passing this motion as it is important. It does not preclude us from making changes to it subsequently. Just as a matter of course, there is a massive difference when you start talking about which index you're using. It's not just simple construction. I happen to have researched it at length. And it varies tremendously across the country. And in fact, maybe higher here than elsewhere. In any case, I would support simple passage of the motion as it is today, recognizing that we have the ability to come back and add whatever modifications we know the resort contribution might be, or when we feel that another index is appropriate. I do, however, lend towards the keep it simple, stupid principle. I think we start to add baggage to things and people have different perspectives, because the construction index last year, it does average almost twice the CPI, depending whether you're taking the building index, the general construction index, et cetera. And I think there will be some controversy about which index is used and which one is applicable. Most of the things we're looking at doing are not building related, they're construction related. And that index is closer to 5% than it is to 4 or 4.5%. But not to over belabor my comments, I've listened for an hour plus. I think it's important we take a decision. I've been on the board for 5 years, entering my 6th year, and this has been a never-ending dialogue. It's time to call the question and show some resolve as to what we think is appropriate going forward.
Okay, I've been asked to call the question. All in favor of the resolution as it was drafted, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Thank you. I believe, as far as I can see, are there any negative, anyone opposed to the resolution? No, I'll check with Mr. Rodman later, but at this point, the resolution passes.
And also Mark somehow dropped off, I think.
I'll check with both of them to get their votes, but the resolution passes.
Larry, this is Stu. I'm in favor of it. I'm sorry I had to drop off for a second.
So thank you, Stu. I appreciate that. And
Mr. Chairman, may I have just a second?
Yes, I was going to turn to you next. We may.
Just so that the board is aware, Ms. Borghese and Victoria and I will continue to refine these numbers through the Finance Committee and the MEMP Committee. So we're not done with this spreadsheet. This is a start. We're where we need to head in the right direction, but we will continue to drill down on these and be bringing them back to the board and the community.
And also for the board, we are working to put together on our website a fact sheet and more information so that the community will have as much information as we can provide about it. And I also want to emphasize for the board, it is my deepest hope, as I believe it is everyone on this phone call's hope, that the community will embrace the proposed referendum and vote it in. That is unquestionably the best way to go forward. But I think I would like just a show of hands of the sense of the board. If the referendum fails, are we prepared to continue to move forward on the special tax district as we adopted last week? All in favor, please raise your hands. Great.
Does that include the ad valorem?
Yes, and we will continue to refine those and continue to refine the numbers with the ability, if we believe that we need to change the approach, which we may, based on the referendum, decide. Is there any other business to come before the meeting at this time? If not, it's my clock 12 after 4. We are going to adjourn for literally 5 minutes, and we'll stay on here on mute. You all can stay on mute. We're going to collect any questions and we'll answer any questions that have come from the community. I want to remind those who may still be on from the community that we do have an annual meeting tomorrow, and at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, and then it will include a financial report, a chairman's report, and some additional information. It will be immediately following. We will open it up for CSA, make sure we have a quorum, and then immediately followed by the ASPO meeting. And in both cases, you'll be able to provide comments and questions, which we will happily do the best we can to respond to. So we're adjourned until 17 after, and we will stay. Those can please stay on if you can, and then we'll answer questions. Can we
have a presentation outlined for tomorrow? Who's going to speak? When? And about what?
Can we go on mute? Yeah. Are we on mute? Just the screen doesn't.
Click on it on the left.
Yeah.
I'm
You're off mute, Larry.
Can we get the screen
I'm
down?
gonna make that happen right now for us.
Hello, everybody. We are going to call the meeting. Well, the meeting has been adjourned. We're going to start the question and answer period. Steve, can you hear me? Can folks hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Yes.
We got 7 questions, so we will not take long. First question comes from Scott Williams. Why has the resort been permitted to not pay its 1% annual fee share as defined in the covenants? Scott, as you've probably heard a dozen times, if not 100 times, the covenant issue is not black and white. It's a legal matter. The resort feels very strongly that it is paying the correct amount at 0.5%. Others may have a different perspective, but at this point in time, our counsel has been that we will continue to have the resort pay the 0.5%, and we're not prepared to take any legal action to the contrary. I don't know what more we can say. They're paying what they appropriately believe, and CSA continues to accept that as the appropriate amount. Question from Leanne Leahy. Over what period would the 600 be collected? Is it time bound or does it sunset? No, as you may have heard, the question of a sunset was not accepted. There will be no sunset. The money will continue to be collected, will continue to be included in the annual assessment amount. Any board at any time can collect less than the prior year's annual assessment amount. And if there's a sense that our needs have been met, which this board cannot forecast that deeply into the future, that board can change the assessment backwards, or if the community is unhappy with the board not changing it, they'll vote in new board members. Behind the numbers being presented by Sam and Dave Borghese, is there a prioritization list of these projects, as we can't get everything done at once? Also, would cost escalation be something to consider since this will be over 10 years? Sam or Dave, you want to speak to, Sam, you want to speak to prioritization, and obviously the board will work with the staff on that, but why don't you?
There will certainly need to be prioritization in that, and Mr. Chairman, that's where we would engage the MEMP and finance and other committees of the board to help us think through those prioritizations. And so we will have more to offer on that, but we can't do $35 million at one time if we had it, but we will prioritize, we will think through it, and we'll do it in a very clear and transparent way with the community.
And in terms of cost escalation?
The cost escalations really need to be considered with respect to the expenditures for the reconstruction of the major roads. There has been some level of inflation considered in what would be called the normal projects for road surfacing, leisure, and bridge. So that's something that we're going to have to fine tune as best we can. But quite frankly, the answer is we got to get started somewhere. And my view is that we need to pass the resolution and start the increase in the homeowner assessment. And we'll have time to worry about the inflation factors going forward.
Thank you. A question from Terry Weiss. What precisely will be discussed for the resort and commercial interest to contribute under the new referendum? We will ask them for a reasonable amount consistent with what we were asking the property owners to add. What is the status of plans to add trolley stops along Sea Pines Drive, and are additional trolley stops included in the infrastructure costs? The question of trolley stops along Sea Pines Drive, as I addressed at, I think, our last board meeting, that issue has been addressed very preliminarily at the short-term rental committee and at the safety and security committee. In both cases, the staff was asked to look at whether or not personal drop-off pads would be appropriate along any of our main roads near the beach. It is no further than that. There is no specific plans or discussions regarding specific trolley stops along Sea Pines Drive, And Sam, with that in mind, I assume.
There are absolutely no trolley stops in any of the numbers we just talked about.
Thank you. Bob Quinn has asked whether actions on the referendum have to await a special meeting of owners that is being called by a petition. Since I have not any understanding that there is a petition to call a special meeting of owners, perhaps Mr. Quinn can discuss this tomorrow at the annual meeting of owners when all of the owners will be together. Shouldn't construction index apply to only the extra 450 and not CS administrative costs? Well, the board hasn't adopted either, so that's issue is moot. And the question of whether or not he asked whether an extra 450 can be ad valorem. I'll impose the 600 be ad valorem. And the question is under the assessment covenant, which we are proposing to amend, the assessments are uniform for all residential property owners. And I don't believe at this point the board would be willing to change that for this particular amount to become ad valorem. So, and I would assume that the administrative nightmare of trying to do that would well offset the benefits. So the answer is it's not currently under consideration. Question from Sue Emke: how long does the 600 increase last? Until such time as another board decides to remove it. Question from David Garvey: what would the resort pay with current referendum proposal versus the original referendum which did not pass? We do not yet have an amount or idea of what the resort's proposed contribution will be. I'm thrilled that they are prepared to include themselves. The last time they were offering to increase from 0.5% to 0.75%. But we don't have
and that's based upon their gross receipts.
Based on their gross
as
receipts.
Adjusted according to the covenants. And you don't know what their gross receipts are until it happens.
And last from a email address, no name. Does the additional assessment go on indefinitely? Does it occur over a specific number of years? There is no sunset. And if the proposal does not have an end date for the incremental 600 per year, does that mean the 35 million needed is not catching up on things that needed to be done? Is there a $3.5 million need per year going out beyond 10 years? This board obviously can focus as far out in the future as we want, but I would, as I've used in many of our discussions, I would simply ask you to look at the home that you own and tell me whether or not you know that 10 years from now, you need a new kitchen, or you won't need new appliances, or you won't need new air conditioner, or you won't need a new roof, or you won't need new furniture. You probably can say, I probably will. I don't know what the cost will be, but I need to assume that I will need that money. Well, the roads in Sea Pines are the same. We know we probably won't get, Sam, I think it's fair to say we won't get to all of the roads that need to be fixed in 10 years. We'd like to, but we probably won't. And even the roads we do get to may need to be repaved, or in some cases may need to be rebuilt depending on what happens, what the weather is, what the climate changes are. There's lots of unknowns. And so our assumption as a board is that the money will continue to be needed as long as the community continues to use our roads, stormwater, drainage, and trails. And if, as I've noted several times today, if at some point in time, a board in the future doesn't believe the money's needed, it will have the authority to simply not collect it that year. That's the number of questions today. Again, board members, I thank you for staying on board. Community listening, I hope you have learned today what the board's processes are. We do listen to you, we do read the comments, and we try to respond as best we can, understanding that our job is to find what is in the best interest of the community, whether we are resident or non-resident, and whether we are renters or non-renters. Comment.
On the other side?
Oh, I'm sorry. Apologize. We do have extra questions. I didn't realize they were two-sided.
I just wanted to make sure we got.
I'm sorry. Committees, come back. Luckily, no one's hung up. I apologize. Anyway, we do have additional questions. There are 13, another 5. Questions from Keith Gargas. What is the useful life of improvements discussed on the call? Sam?
Depending on the improvements, when we put a road in place and we make the drainage improvements, we will go for useful life for the reinforced concrete drainage improvements to upwards of 50 years. So what we're doing is going from the poorly is the wrong word. We're going to a modern construction for the roadways and the road beds to modern drainage facilities. And so the useful life should be anywhere from 40 to 50 years for those improvements at a minimum.
And please understand that the 14 million over 10 years is not the total amount. I mean, there are more work that needs to be done beyond 10 years that is not included in the 35 million. So yes, drainage will continue to be a significant issue going forward.
As long as it rains and the saltwater tide flows in and out of the Sea Pines community, drainage is going to be an issue. We've got to just do our best with it.
Thank you. Another question from Keith Gargas. Can we add a prohibition that no contract for improvements will be entered into with any company for which any board member or their relatives have an ownership interest? In the event a board member submits a bid, there must be some transparent process for approval if the board believes this is the best contract. Our board is subject to the legal requirements on ethics and conflicts. If a board member has a conflict, the board can determine that they recuse themselves from any consideration. I don't necessarily think, and the board, we will discuss this at greater length at the appropriate time. I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to preclude any board member from submitting a bid, but clearly if they do submit a bid, they would have to be recused from any consideration by the staff or otherwise of it. So we'll discuss that at length if and when that issue comes up. Question from Jennifer Lineweber. If there are concerns regarding homeowners' ability to pay the additional $600, could a payment plan be considered for some? We do in fact allow payment plans for those who are having financial issues with their assessment. And that would certainly continue to be the case if and when this referendum passed and the assessment was increased. I guess I should note fairly that probably is not true. David, you may know better than I. That may not be true of taxes, real estate taxes, if this special taxes.
Really? Well, I think even our payment plans have some level of interest costs associated with it because it'd be unfair to those who pay immediately versus those that want to pay over time. From a real estate tax standpoint, obviously there are interest costs if you do not pay timely in accordance with the bill. The more interesting thing is that if you don't pay the real estate tax, your property could be subject to a tax sale. And that generally means that most people will find a way to pay the real estate tax. And if it's not on time, there's an interest cost to it as well.
Right. So again, I hope that the community will support the referendum. Our penalties are probably, we are probably easier to deal with on an installment basis than the county would be.
That's right.
Or the tax district would be, because it would be us still, but it would be under the tax district. Collection would be under the county.
Collection would still be under the county, and they're the ones who are going to assess whatever interest rate there is to assess.
Right. Okay. Question from Arnold Bressler. Has there been any indication from the leaders of the opposition to the last referendum that they will support this new referendum? We don't classify groups of people who opposed our referendum per se. There were a lot of different reasons why people opposed it, and we certainly never asked all the people who voted no. You can read on Facebook. Arnold, you and others will be able to read on Facebook, I'm sure, since it's an active area, whether there is a strong opposition or not. We will certainly be identifying in Sam and my weekly letters any comments we receive that indicate specific points of concern and which we will try to address. I certainly hope that those who voted against the last referendum will find this to be more acceptable. A question from Dana Durham: will the spreadsheet shown today be shared? Absolutely. It will be on our website as we put together our fact sheet. A question from Mike Clark: how are we addressing the resort contribution? As I indicated, we're continuing to talk to them. Let's see if I've got this. From Carrie D. Villette, if I understand the motion that was passed correctly, replenishing cash reserves was not included in this funding. Does the board expect to earmark a specific amount annually out of the base assessment? Dave, do you have any thoughts on that?
Essentially in 2021, well, the remainder of this year in 2021, we will be spending somewhere near $3 million on a section of North Sea Pines Drive, which is coming from our reserves. If you look at the sheet, which requires 35 million, there's a significant amount of money related to the 35 million we need. So that in fact replenishes the reserves we're going to be using for the remainder of this year and for 2021. So there is replenishment.
Now I believe we have completed the questions. Sam, did I catch them all?
I think that's all I've got.
So again, thank you all. And I again hope that the community will get behind us. We expect to continue to announce progress on the referendum, and we will certainly do so. But our goal is to have a vote sometime in December so that we can have a hopefully passage well in time to terminate our work on the STD and failure, if necessary, to move forward. Thank you again, board members, for your cooperation and for an excellent meeting of dialogue. We appreciate it. And thanks to the people who are watching for staying with us. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sam and Larry.